Hey, and welcome back to another video. And in this video, we're going to take a look at how we can build a custom pop-up view in SwiftUI. So you may be wondering, what is this? Well, if you watch my previous video, presenting and dismissing views in SwiftUI, you clocked that all of those views covered the screen. What we want to display a view over our entire content view, but we only wanted it to be a custom view that transitions from the bottom and only covers a small portion of it, like maybe, I don't know, the height of that view. So let's actually see how we could do this now. So in your SwiftUI project, let's create a new SwiftUI view called Popup View. And I'm just going to do a bit of typing and then we'll break it down. So within our Popup View, we've got we've got 3 views here. So we've got an icon, as you can see, using FS symbols. We've got a title with some text, and we've also got some more text as well with some dummy content as well. So what we're going to do now is actually add this within our body of our Popup View. So let's do that now. So now you should see your text here with your information icon, and we're just setting the spacing here 0 so we can control the padding ourselves between each one of the views. And we're also saying that we want the text to be aligned within the center. So now that we've done that, I actually want to set my view to have a rounded rectangle as its background, but I only want it to have rounded corners on the top left and the top right hand corners. So in order to solve this, what I actually did was I actually found a great snippet on Stack Overflow here. So from when I was looking for it, and it's basically from this article here from SwiftUI Lab, which allows us to define the specific corners that we want to round. So what I'm going to do is add in this struct called round corners that allows us to do this. So let's do that now. What I'm going to do is actually, in order to resolve this, I'm just going to add in this snippet here that I found. So let's do that now. And then we're just going to paste that below our extension here, like so. And then just so I don't forget in the future where this came from, and you can see where it came from, I'm just going to add a link as well. So now let's actually use this on our VStack to see this in action. So on our VStack, let's actually set a background on it. And then our background is going to use that rounded corners. So we should create an instance of that rounded corners that we just added in. And then you'll see that with the rounded corners, you're able to specify the color, top, left, right, bottom, left, right, corner radius. So for the color, I'm just going to specify white. And then for the top left, we're going to specify 10. Top right, we're also going to specify 10. And then for the other two, we're just going to say 0, 0, because we don't want to apply a corner radius onto it. Now, because our SwiftUI preview is actually white, and we just said we want our rounded rectangle color to be white as well, you're not going to be able to see it. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is on our pop-up, we're going to add a background to it of blue. And then just so we can actually see this a bit more, we're actually going to change the device that it previews with. So we're going to say we want the preview layout to be size that fits. And what this means is it's going to make the preview fit the size of the component. Now, if you look really closely, you can see the blue background here, but we can't fully see it completely. So in order to fix that, on our pop-up view, before we add our background, we're going to add in some padding. So now you should see that our view has the rounded rectangles on the top left, right, and right corners, but not the bottom ones. But what I want to do as well is I want to make sure that this view actually fills the entire screen, and I also want to add in some more padding around this view as well. So on your VStack, what you want to do is before your padding, you want to set a frame, and you want the max width to be infinity. So what this is going to do is this is going to ensure that whenever we use this view, it fills up the entire width of the screen. And then we're going to edit the padding on the horizontal and vertical axis individually. So let's do that now. So now we've added horizontally, we've added 24, and vertically, top and bottom, we've added 40. Cool. So now you should see that our pop-up is looking pretty good, and it's got the effect that we wanted. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is we actually want to give our pop-up view a bit of a shadow around it so that it's kind of like looks like it's lifting off the screen. But we actually only want to apply this shadow effect onto the rounded corners view that we specified below, just so this modifier doesn't get too big. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a computed property called background, and then we're going to pass that within here. So in our file, just underneath here, we're going to create another. So now we have our background, and this background has the rounded corners that we used before. So this view that you're seeing here, and what we're saying is that on this rounded corner, we want to add a shadow where the opacity is 0.2 and has a 3 pixel radius on it. So now we want to apply this shadow onto our background. So rather than us having this rounded corners here, we're just going to say background like so. So now if you actually resume and run this, you should notice that you now have a shadow border around your view, and because we separate this out into an extension, it's a lot more easier to read. So before we actually wrap up this pop-up view, the final thing I want to do is actually add in a close button in the top right hand corner like so. So let's actually create a new computer property called close. We've got our close computer property, and we just got a button in it with an SF symbol. So we want to use on our pop-up view in our VStack, we want to actually apply the overlay modifier to position this in the top right hand corner. So let's actually do that now. Cool. So now you can see that we have our close button here, so we're all good to go. So let's actually add this onto our content view to actually preview what this will look like when it's added onto the screen. So in your content view, you actually want to use the overlay modifier again, and this time align this to the bottom of the screen. So let's go into our content view, and then we're going to just add in some UI, just so you know we're not just working with the hello world text. So now we've got a Z stack on the screen, and we've got our color min, and we've got our button. So this button is what we're actually going to use to actually toggle our source of truth to show our custom pop-up. So on our color min, you can see here that it's not actually filling the entire screen. So what we need to do to fix this is we actually need to tell our color to ignore the safe area layout. So let's do that now. And now you can see that our color is ignoring that. So if you want to learn more about this, then you should check out my video in the SwiftUI sessions playlist called Safe Areas in SwiftUI. So let's actually add in our pop-up view to see what this looks like. So on our Z stack, let's use the overlay modifier, and we want to use the alignment one, and we want to say here bottom, and on our content we want to pass in here our pop-up view like so. So you can see here that our pop-up view is actually now aligned to the bottom of the screen. But if you look closely, you'll notice that it's only aligned to the bottom of our safe area and not to our device. So in order to fix this, what we need to do is on our overlay, we need to tell it to ignore the safe area layout. So let's do that now. So now that we've done that, you'll see that our overlay ignores the safe area for the bottom of our view. Cool, so this looks good. So what we want to do now is we actually want to animate this pop-up view coming on and off the screen. So we'll need to have some kind of source of truth like I mentioned before in terms of presenting it and dismissing our view. So let's create one. So we're going to create a new file called Sheet Manager. And within this new Swift file, we're also going to add in an enum to handle presenting and dismissing the view. So let's do that now. Within our source of truth here, Sheet Manager, we have an enum called action, and it has 3 cases. So it has an NA, which means not available, nothing's happened. We have present, and we also have dismiss as well. So these are the actions that we're going to work with when we want to show and hide our sheet. So now that we've done that, we need to have some kind of property to handle showing and dismissing this view. So let's create a publish property, but we'll make this private set so that you can't modify it from outside of this scope. Cool. So you can see here that we have that publish property, and we've marked it private set, so you can't change it from outside the scope. And by default, the action is not available because nothing has happened. So next up, we actually need 2 functions to handle opening and another one to handle closing it. So let's handle this now. So let's create these 2 functions. So let's break down our first function. So our first function here, present, we just set the action to say, hey, I've been presented. And we've got another action here to say, hey, I want you to dismiss. So what I want to do is I actually want to create an extension on this action to actually tell me if it has been presented, because I don't want to have to do an equals to on each one of these cases. So let's actually add this in now. On our sheet manager.action, we've got an extension with a computer property that tells us if the current state is, pause, if the current state of this action is equal to present, then it is presented. So within our present function, what we want to also do as well is that if it's already being presented, then we actually don't want to call this line again. We just want to kind of stop execution. And this is actually going to prevent you from allowing yourself to have multiple cards stacked on top of each other. So this will only allow you to have one pop-up view on the screen at a time. So it's actually adding this code now. So we're using a guard statement here, and we're saying that if the action hasn't been presented, then you can continue or else stop execution with this return. So now that that's sorted, I actually want the source of truth to actually live at the root of my app. And the reason why is because I may want to reuse the sheet functionality on other screens within my app and not just the content view. So let's create a state object at the root of our application. So if we go into our test app project here, which is the root where you see the app main, we'll create our state object here. And in order to actually pass this down into the children, we'll use the environment object property wrapper. And if you want to learn more about this, then check out my video in the SwiftUI sessions playlist called environment object in SwiftUI. So now let's actually add the environment object modifier onto our content view and inject this into there. So we need to go into our content view to actually use the environment object property wrapper to receive this source of truth. So let's go into our content view, and we're going to add in the environment object property wrapper. Okay, cool. And now what we need to do is we now need to use this on our SwiftUI preview so that it doesn't crash. So when you're actually using the environment object property wrapper, before you do anything else, you want to make sure that you set your SwiftUI preview. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So now we've set our environment object on our content view. Cool. So in this file, what we want to do is that when someone actually taps on a button in our content view, we want to show our view moving in from the bottom and moving out as well. So we want to animate it coming up from the bottom and then moving down as well. So what we need to do is we actually need to wrap our pop-up view in a condition and give it a transition modifier to tell it how to enter the screen and how to also leave as well. So what we're going to do is on our overlay, we're going to use our computer property that tells us whether our sheet is presented. And if it is, then we're going to show our pop-up view. So let's just type out this now. So what we're saying here is that if the action is presented, so if the state of it is presented, then we're going to show our pop-up view. And now in our pop-up view, we actually want to add a transition within this view. And if you want to learn more about transitions, then check out my video in the SwiftUI sessions playlist called Transitions in SwiftUI. So let's go into our pop-up view. And then below our overlay, we're going to say dot transition, and then we're going to say move, and then the edge bottom like so. Okay, cool. So now let's actually test this out. So in order to test this out, what I'm actually going to do is actually run this on the simulator rather than SwiftUI previews, because sometimes the animations can be a bit flaky and just not work. So the simulator is just way more reliable. So let's actually run this on the simulator now. Cool. And now we tap on this button, you'll see that it does show our pop-up view whenever we actually tap on the button, but this time it's not actually animating it. So why is that? Well, remember what I said before, we're not actually able to do and handle transitions unless we use an animation as well. And in order to fix this, what we need to do is actually wrap our present function within the with animation block. So because I'm going to be using a simulator for the rest of this tutorial, I'm actually just going to hide the canvas. And then in order to fix this issue, what we're going to do is just wrap this in the with animation block like so. And then now if we rerun this, and now if we tap on the button, you should see that our sheet now animates from the bottom. So when you're working with transitions and you want to do stuff like this, you need to make sure that whenever you change the source of truth within your model, that you want to wrap that within a with animation block, or else your transition will not work. So this looks all good, but one thing we've not done is when you tap on this button, it's not actually closing our card. So let's see how we can handle this now. So in order to do this, what we need to do is actually add a closure to our pop-up view to tell us when someone has tapped on this button. And the reason why I'm doing it this way and not just directly passing in the sheet manager to the pop-up view is because what about in the future if I actually want to perform some kind of action alongside dismissing the view? So the closure will allow us to just tell us that, hey, I've been tapped, now you handle the rest. So let's go into our pop-up view and we're going to add in a new closure property called didClose. So now we have our closure property here, and because we've added this in, we're now going to get an error on our SwiftUI preview. So in order to fix this, just add in the curly braces like so, and then if you scroll down, what we want to do is we want to actually use our didClose when someone actually taps on our close button. So if you just scroll down within here where it says handle close, we now want to call our closure didClose. So if we go back to our content view, you should notice as well, if it builds, that you'll actually get an error on your pop-up view and it's saying you're missing the parameter didClose. So let's actually insert this. And now we have our closure to tell us when someone has tapped on this button. Now what we want to do is we want to call our sheet manager .dismiss. But now, like I said before, because we're going to be modifying our source of truth, we want to make sure that we animate it. So we need to wrap it in a with animation block. Cool. So now let's run this on the simulator again. Let's tap on this and we see it animating up. And if we tap on the button, it animates off the screen. So we finally have our own pop-up card. Now this does work, and if this is something that you need for a very simple example, then this is all good and well and it's all good. But what about if I actually wanted to have these sheets on multiple screens within my application? Do I really want to have to repeat all of this code and copy and paste it every single time? And also, what about if something goes wrong in our code? We now have to update our logic in multiple places. So in order to actually improve this, what we can do, rather than actually having to copy and paste our code between different views, we can actually create our own custom modifier that allows us to easily reuse this functionality across different screens. And if you actually want to learn more about building your own custom modifiers, you should check out my video, Custom Modifiers in SwiftUI, which is within the SwiftUI Sessions playlist. So let's create a new file called Popup View Modifier. And then let's actually just write out the template for this and then we'll break it down. So this is the name of our modifier here, and we're actually saying that we want to conform to the view modifier. So now, because we're saying that, the body will allow us to access the content, and this content is the view that the modifier has been applied on. So this is in our case, this will be whatever view that we use this on. So we're going to apply this modifier onto our Z stack, and we can actually, now apply our own custom, SwiftUI modifier within this view modifier. So within this view modifier, what we want to do is you actually want to pass in the sheet manager so we can actually control handling the presentation and dismissal. So in here, we're going to actually use the observed object property wrapper to actually pass our source of truth within this view modifier. So let's do that now. So the reason why I use an observed object here and not the environment object is because what about if we have a situation where we've not actually injected our sheet manager into the environment? This view modifier would actually crash. So by using the observed object, it actually forces you to make sure that you inject the sheet manager within this view modifier. So now what we're going to do is actually tweak our enum slightly so that we can allow users to actually pass in their own custom content such as titles, SF symbols, and information. Because remember, if we want to use this on different screens, you may not have the same information all the time. So let's go into our sheet manager, and then within our action, I'm just going to do a bit of typing and then we'll break it down. Okay, cool. So now what we've got here in our enum is we now have our struct called info, and this is the information that we're going to use to configure our card when it's shown on the screen, so you can customize this stuff here. And you can see that we've now changed our case info to now include this new associated value, so we can actually extract it from here. So we've got a few errors here, and the reason why that is because now our present case is now using an associated value. So we need to actually fix these errors because it's not able to just do this assignment anymore. So the first one we're going to tackle is our computed property. So let's actually just type this out and then break it down. So what we're actually doing here is we're actually using the case matching to check to see if self, which in our case is the action property here, is presented And we're now saying that we don't want to use the associated value within the enum case. So if it does match this present, then we're going to return true, or else we're going to return false. So when you have associated values, you can't just do a standard equals equals to. You can actually do the pattern matching for the associated value case, like so. And then finally, what we want to do is in our present function, we now want to pass in a config so that you can present this view with your own configuration. So you may be looking at this and wondering, what is this new config as well? So this is called a type alias if you've not come across this, and it just allows you to almost create a new type. It just allows you to almost create a new type, so you can just have like a shorthand version of it. So what I've done here is, rather than me having to type out actually not info everywhere, I've just shortened it to config. So now wherever we want to use this type, we can now reference it by just using this config, as you can see here, and that's why it's valid. Okay. Cool. So now in our view modifier, let's actually add the code to actually show the pop-up. And all we need to do is actually copy our overlay logic into this content view and then apply it. So let's actually do that now and then break it down. So you go into your content view, we just copy everything here with the overlay, and we're just gonna cut this. And then now if we go into our view modifier, what we want to do is we actually want to apply this onto our content. So let's do that now. So now what we're saying here is that the content, so the view that this modifier gets applied onto, I want you to add an overlay, and I want you to, do this logic that we have here where we check if the sheet has been presented, and then we're going to show the pop-up view, and we're going to have our logic to handle dismissal. But one thing that I've clocked here is that we're actually still using the computer property here, and we're not actually accessing the value from our present case here. So we're actually going to get the value directly from our present and then pass this into our pop-up view. So let's just refactor this now a bit. Cool. So now what we're saying is we're now getting the config from our present. So when our action is present, if it does match this, then we're going to get the config from our present. And now what we want to do is we actually want to pass this config into our pop-up view. So let's go into our pop-up view, and then let's create a new property called config, which is going to be of type sheetmanager.config, like so. And then we should get some errors inside of our preview, which is fine. So we're just going to initialize this with the content that we currently have now. What we want to do is we want to use our config properties within this view. So if you just scroll all the way down, so on our icon, we want to access the system symbol. So we're going to say config.system name. So now we can access the SS symbol that we pass into our config. And then on our title, we want to say config.title, so we can access the title. And then finally, on here, we want to say config.content, so we can actually access the content that you're seeing here on the screen. So if we now just go back to our view modifier, what we want to do is we now want to actually pass in the config to our pop-up, like so. So now our config gets passed in, so we can configure this with whatever information that we call whenever we call our present function. Okay, cool. So now what I want us to do is actually build a function that allows us to turn this modifier into a function, like I just said. So I'm just going to type this out and then we'll break it down. So now what we're saying here is we've got an extension on our view. So this can be used on any view. And then we have our function called popup, where we pass in our sheet manager, and this sheet manager gets passed into our popup view modifier, and we're going to return some view. So what this extension allows you to do is it allows you to follow this convention where you can have functions after modifiers. So let's actually use this modifier on our content view. So if we just go back into our content view, and we have our error here because obviously we now have to pass in a config. But before we do that, on our Z stack, let's just call our popup with, and then we just pass in our sheet manager like so. So now, like I said before, we have our error. So we want to actually pass in some information to our config. So let's do that now. So I'm going to type this out and then we'll break it down. So now we have our own custom modifier that we can actually call on any view. So let's actually run this again on a simulator and see what happens. So we just hit this button now, you'll see that we now can see our card coming in, and we just hit the X, it now goes down. So it works the exact same, except this time now, all we need to do is just pass in our sheet manager and call present within an animation block. So we've just reduced the number of lines of code that we had to write to recreate this functionality, and we can easily use this within anywhere in our app. So just to show you how this actually works to present with two different buttons, what we're going to do is actually just embed this within a VStack. On our second button here, we're just going to change this to a different SF symbol. So let's just find one. So I'm just going to copy this one here, and we'll just change that. And then we're just going to change the content too, just so you can see the difference. So let's actually just run this now. And just to make this a bit clearer, let's actually name this custom sheet 2 and custom sheet 1. Okay, let's run this again. So now we've got our two sheet examples. So if we tap on our first sheet, you'll see that we can see the information that we declared there. And if I tap on my second sheet, you'll see that it actually doesn't present the second view. And that's because in our present function, if you remember, we had the logic to block it if there's already a card being presented. So in order to get rid of this, if we hit close, and if we hit on our second sheet, you'll now see that we actually have our second example being here. And one thing to note here is that I'm not actually declaring the height of this view. You can see that this view is just simply kind of like building and expanding based on its content. So this is really dynamic. And if I hit close, you'll see that it now closes our sheet. So now we have our own custom pop overview. But just one last thing before we finish is I just want to see how we can update our animation and just make it look a bit better, because right now we have a linear animation curve. So instead of having a linear animation curve, I want to change this to spring. So let's just do this now. So on all of our animation blocks, let's just say dot spring on both of our buttons, and then within our pop-up modifier on this animation block here, we're going to say dot spring as well. So if we just run this again to see the difference between the linear and the dot spring, you'll now notice that when we hit this, we now get this nice kind of springing animation, and when it leaves as well, we get it as well, and same here. So you can just see that the spring animation just makes our apps look a lot nicer, in my opinion. Alright, that's everything in this video. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate if you left a comment in the comment section below. Also, as well, if you haven't already, I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up, as well as subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell to get updates whenever I release a new video. That's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.